had seen a tree-level orb that grew and started chasing the car, and she was worried about it. And there's thousands of these types of testimonies out there where the orb is actually, chasing a vehicle. And she says, I told you to speed up. You remember me telling you to speed up? And I do remember that, putting the pedal to the metal and trying to go faster. I may have actually had some type of encounter myself. She said while I was asleep on her couch, she had purchased a white dress for the sales convention, and it was muddy from head to toe. And as she's telling me this, I'm thinking, did I have too much to drink? Did we run into a ditch? Were we trying to pull the car out? All these mundane explanations, trying to come forth.
Following a near-death experience that prompted a personal awakening to the underlying interdimensional nature of a reality, tonight Russell Brinegar shares insight into the realm of the paranormal. That and more coming right up on My Alien Life. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Very excited to have the author of Overlords of the Singularity, The Manipulation of Humankind by Hidden UFO Intelligences and the Quest for Transcendence. Russell Brinegar joins me. Thank you so much, sir, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for your invitation, Cam. I'm glad to be here.
So I've taken a look at your book. It's a big book, sir, and I don't know of a book in the UFO community really that has that much information. I haven't read one yet. When you started the book, did you intend for it to focus, basically on everything? There's a lot of stuff there for us to look at.
Well, to properly answer that question, I'd have to go back in time just a little bit to explain how the book came to be. It is a big book. It's 545 pages of meat, and I always tell people if you don't have time to read 300 or 400 UFO books like I have, just read my book, and it's pretty comprehensive as far as taking you through all of the classic cases, near-death experiences, ghosts, how it connects with the cryptids, and the whole meta-phenomena of the paranormal, and what may be underneath it all. So I'm pretty proud of it. It's available on Kindle. It started out just Kindle only, and I downloaded it into my own Kindle because I wanted to hear it. The title is Overlords of the Singularity, and that's kind of a name that came to me after I compiled it. What happened was I was 54 years old, pretty much living my life as agnostic, material reductionist, and for your listeners, a material reductionist is just basically somebody that thinks that consciousness is an epiphenomena of the brain. When you die, you're dead. It's eternal unconsciousness. Hard science guy. And then on August the 18th of 2009, I had what's commonly called a near-death experience, and that changed my paradigm of living. And from that, I can explain the details of that. But let's just say after that happened, I immersed myself into, first of all, near-death experiences because I wanted to see, who all has had one of these. I started with Eben Alexander, Proof of Heaven, and Kenneth Ring, and anything and everything I could get my hands on regarding the near-death experience that I had. I needed an explanation for it because it was pretty strange. And what happened was I was an occupational therapist in a nursing home, and I've been there for several years. I was a manager. And for people that don't know, an occupational therapist isn't somebody that gets people jobs. It's working with clients who have lost their independence to try to develop a program for them to restore their independence in things like dressing, grooming, bathing, toileting, and feeding. I worked in long-term care exclusively. And on August 18th, 2009, I went home to mow my grass, and it was a nice sunny day. And I started up the mower and went about 15 feet. And I got a really strange sense of fatigue that came over me. And at first I thought I was dehydrated. So I went inside the house and got something to drink, kind of turned the air conditioner on, flopped around in my bed a little bit till I felt a little bit. I was slightly nauseous. And I went back outside and started the lawnmower up again and went about another 15 feet. And that same feeling of fatigue came over me, only about 100 times worse. And I knew I was going to drop. And I just, it came to me what was happening. I was having a heart attack. And I just was pretty sure that I was going to pass away right there in the grass. And even though I was brought up a fundamentalist Christian as a child, and when I was about 13, I had questions about it. And I even wrote a book in 2000 about that, kind of an analysis of where a lot of the stories, particularly in the Old Testament, came from ancient Sumer and Egypt. And even though I considered myself an agnostic, I was curious, what actually happens to somebody if they do pass away. So strangely enough, I was going around in circles, sort of like a dog does when he's looking for a place to do his business, because I didn't want to hit my head on a rock and find me with a bloody head. And as I was looking for some place to lay down, I realized it was too late. And I stood there, and for some reason I was compelled to look in the direction of the sun. And I got this feeling where everything just sort of was silent. The noises on the road quit. The birds stopped. And something I never would have expected happened. Several, what I would call entities, showed up with me, starting with the most familiar. And then it was almost as if I Googled Russ is dying into a computer, and associated links started popping up with the most relevant first. And I got a positive ID in my mind on a few of these individuals, and what I was just gobsmacked by, that was some of them that were there with me in sort of an etheric form were still living their life here on Earth. And that was very confusing. Now I've got a tentative answer for that now, but at the time it was kind of strange. And then I just instantly got like a mental download that I had to make up my mind really quick, that I didn't necessarily have to cross the veil. The people that were there for me were there to welcome me if I chose to go that direction. But they imparted this feeling to me of the fragility and the preciousness of my life here on Earth. Just posed a question. I'm sure you want to come over at this point in time. I thought about it for a split second, and since I was given a choice, I thought how neat it would be to go forward in this physical life with this new knowledge that we're living in a multidimensional reality, and there's way more to it than what I thought of anyway, in this material reductionist. So I went in. I didn't call the ambulance. I went inside and got the keys to my Camaro convertible and drove myself to the hospital. And I just walked in with the keys and asked them to park the car and bring the keys to me wherever they took me. And they took me in a little room, and the doctor cried morphine, and he said, yes, you're having a major heart attack, and we need to get you up to Ball Hospital because we're not really prepared here in Newcastle, Indiana, to do this. So the first thing I thought then was, oh, goody, I get to ride in an ambulance. I always wanted to see what that was like, to be on a stretcher with the lights flashing and everything. So they took me up to Ball, and the doctors were ready to do a quadruple bypass, where they said they could try stents, but they may not work. So I had them give me a rundown on both options, and the stents seemed a lot less invasive. And one of the things, so I went that direction, but one of the things that impacted me in the yard as I was standing there, and it was split seconds, making up my mind if I wanted to continue this life or cross the veil and be with my loved ones. One of the relationships that came to mind when I was considering whether to cross over at that moment on August 18, 2009, was a woman that I dated for about 3 years, and we had both been married and divorced a couple times before, and she wanted to take the relationship to the next level, and I felt fear. I didn't want to get married a third time, so we went our separate ways. And she was one of the people that were there for me in my yard as I was dying. And strangely, after the doctors put 2 stents in the arteries in the back of my heart, they rolled me out because I was going to stay overnight in the hospital for one night. Guess who was there crying as they rolled me past her? And the only thing that I could think of, her name's Julie, and the only thing I could think of was, I'm going to fix this. So that was in August of 2009, and in October 30th, that same year, she and I flew to Las Vegas, and we married each other. We got married by Dracula. We had a lot of fun out in Las Vegas getting married. And we've been married for 10, 11 years now, and everything's going fine. So I would say, if fear is keeping you from going into taking a relationship to the next level, don't let that happen, because, you might live to regret that. So, I mean, I can't imagine my life without her now. So that happened, and once I got back home, I delved into the literature. I've learned all the ketamine theories and all the scientific explanations for what actually happened to me. And the strangest, one of the strangest things, as I was standing there basking in these people that were around me, is I actually encountered what I could only describe as a transcended version of myself. And that really blew me away, that there's an aspect of my own being that's existing in another realm, in another dimension, as I'm living my life here on Earth. And that actually prompted me to read up quite a bit on quantum mechanics and concepts like superposition, where an electron can exist in a probability field and also in a measured value as a particle. And some of the quantum physicists like Dr. Sean Carroll and Dr. Carlo Rovelli and Brian Greene are all saying that actually happens on the macro level too, that the multiverse, as they call it, is in superposition with a wave function that has an expanded set of probabilities. So what all the physicists are actually saying is that the only underlying reality is an eternal, infinite probability field, and that all these universes that bubble up through the multiverse go in and out of superposition with this field. So I've just come to a completely different understanding of the nature of reality based on cutting-edge quantum physics, what happened to me, and how I got into the UFOs was in fall of 2012. Do you remember back in December of 2012 where everybody was worried that the world was going to come to an end and all that? Either that or people.
Yeah, another one of those times where everybody thought the world was coming to an end.
Right. Well, I got a call from a friend of mine at a campground that I've belonged to for 14 years who was an avid ghost hunter. And I just got a random call, and he asked me to Atlanta, Indiana, to spend the night at the Rhodes House.
That was your friend Carl?
Yeah, that was my friend Carl.
Right.
And so I showed up there. I was kind of surprised that I even took him up on the invitation, because I was thinking, it's like I had a foot in both worlds. Part of me, the hard material reductionist, was saying I'm going to go there to watch paint dry. And then the other part of me says, now, you didn't think that, when you died, there was anything after life, and now there is. So, open yourself up to these other things. So I don't regret at all my night that I spent in the haunted house, because groups of people showed up with their EVP equipment, that's electronic voice equipment. And it was quite interesting watching people attempt to contact people from the other side. And I'd already had a contact with people from the other side in sort of a two-way mentally telepathic communication. So I was open to it.
Let me ask you this. What was your impression when you saw your first EVP? What did you think, and what was that like, and what did you see?
Okay, well, coming from a hard science background, I was amused, and I had to chuckle, because what I imagined was some engineer in a lab producing a random word generator. and being amused himself as he was designing the piece of equipment that people were going to, sort of like pareidolia, where people make patterns that don't exist.
Right.
Because these words would come up on the random word generators, and I thought sometimes, people were making a little bit too much of it. But it was interesting because that acted as a springboard to Dr. Dean Radin. He's a professor of noetic sciences out in California. And he's actually done some work with random word generators and some experimental evidence that human thought can actually statistically move a random word generator in a direction that the thought wants it to go. So there is something to it. And so that got me interested in studying all the ghost types, such as the historical sightings. And there's one type called an etheric revenant that uses biologicals, to perpetuate itself, which may have spawned some of our vampire legends and vortexes and just all the different crowd demons and different types of ghosts. But what really made the leap into the UFO field was Dr. Kenneth Ring's Omega Project, because in that book he made a comparison between near-death experiences, which I had already had one myself, and alien abductions. And that really sparked my curiosity. So from there, sort of like a springboard, I dove into all of the UFO material that's in the public domain, starting with Dr. Jacques Vallée, John Keel. I consider myself sort of a disciple of John Keel. I've read every magazine article he's ever written and every book he's ever wrote. And I really think that out of all the authors, he was the closest in his insights to what's underneath it all. So I have, there's a fellow named Andrew Colvin that's made a lot of collections of his early 60s magazine writings. And it's available from audible.com, like Flying Saucer to the Center of Your Mind or The Outer Limits of the Twilight Zone. These are collections of Keel's writings. And I think he was spot on in a lot of his observations. He didn't, he fully recognized that there's sort of a circus that follows around ufology. There's a good share of hucksters and profiteers out there, and he stayed away from it. But he wasn't so much interested in endless documentation of sightings as he was the intelligence behind the UFO phenomenon. That's what puzzled him up to the day that he died. And so, yeah, Timothy Good, Above Top Secret. I'm sitting in my man cave here with over 300 books that I've got under my belt there from all different kinds of authors. Ivan T. Sanderson, Curtis Peebles, Leonard Stringfield, and his research about UFO crash retrievals. And my take that I learned from Keel, he had a famous quote called "Belief is the enemy." And what he meant by that was if you attach yourself to a particular paradigm, you say, aha, I know what this is about, it's going to possibly stop you from being open to information you might encounter in the future. So what I've got is my own personal experience with a multidimensional reality and a near-death experience, and books that anybody and their brother can read in the public library or on Amazon in the public domain. And from the near-death experience and the volume of literature that I've perused, I've been able to connect some dots. And I started formulating a picture because all of these UFO authors, like Vallée, said the UFO phenomena is a control mechanism for human consciousness. And then there's another fellow named William Bromley. He wrote a book called The Gods of Eden. And what he started out doing was trying to get to the underlying causes of war. And what he thought he would find would be causes like poverty and territorial acquisition and all that. But what he concluded was that there's two different factions of extraterrestrial intelligence that are interacting with humanity. One he called a custodial race, and the other he called a maverick race. One of them has control intentions over the human race, and the other ones have our spiritual evolution in mind. And if you look at all of the scriptures and spiritual literature throughout all the religions on earth, you get that same theme. Like in the Quran, you got the Muslim legend of the jinn, and then the Christian demons. And there's always this, Keel called it the Alpha group versus the Omega group. Bromley called it the custodial versus the maverick. There's these two dualistic forces that are beyond the dimension that we live in that have to do with humanity and interact with us. And the strange thing that Keel identified that I completely tentatively agree with is that the intelligences in dimensions beyond our own, within what he called the super spectrum, or the electromagnetic super spectrum, was that they have access to the collective human unconsciousness, which is the same thing that Dr. Carl Jung said that. He wrote a book called Flying Saucers, The Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. And a lot of people don't realize just how obsessed Dr. Carl Jung was with the flying saucer phenomenon. It really puzzled him because he knew they were presenting themselves as physical objects. He knew they weren't hallucinations as people, as we normally define a hallucination. They're sort of in a pseudo-reality in his mind. And he thought that they represented the mandala, or things hoped for, the greatest aspirations of humankind. But underneath all of the major UFO researchers that I've encountered, there's always this technological aspect of it. And I kept running into that over and over again. In the last third of Disneyland of the Gods by Keel, he pretty much nails it and makes a prediction that at some point in the future, a computer is going to be running the world, and this computer may be an intelligence that's trying to use humanity to recreate their super science. And Jim Marrs said the same thing in his book, Alien Agenda. He says somebody's trying to recreate their super science. So when you come to that point, you wonder, well, who could this possibly be? And then you get into forbidden archaeology and the fact that, people like Graham Hancock are identifying this event called the Younger Dryas Impact Event of 12,920 years ago, where before that there appears to have been a globally interconnected megalithic civilization going back tens of thousands of years. And you've got the Peary Reese maps that indicate that at some point Antarctica was mapped from the air when they knew the coastline, before it had any ice on it. So there's a lot of indicators and a lot of cutting-edge researchers, Brian Forster, Graham Hancock, a lot of people are saying that, number one, the Great Pyramid might be a lot older than what people think it is, and there may have been a pre-existent civilization prior to what we know as Egypt, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. It goes way beyond that. Into the culture of Sumer and their legends of the Anunnaki, those that came from the sky. And it is a real puzzle that 6,000 years ago, you've got Sumerian cuneiform that has depictions of the solar system with accurate sizes for the planets, with the sun in the middle and all the planets around it. And that isn't possible for them to have known that. So there's a lot of indications that there was a culture that existed prior to 12,000 years ago that was disrupted by a cataclysm. And then you bring in people like Dr. Tom Van Flandern and his exploded planet hypothesis that about 3 million years ago, by his estimation, there was a planet between Mars and Jupiter that exploded or was blown up and became the asteroid belt. And then Dr. Brandenburg identified some isotopes on Mars that indicates a hydrogen bomb explosion. So then, there's other people like Joseph Farrell that talk about the cosmic war, a war in heaven. We've all heard the biblical mythology of the cosmic war or the war in heaven. So there may be things out there that have happened in our galaxy that have affected our local solar system, that have a great part in our past that we just don't know a whole lot about. And it's too bad that 5 million scrolls at the Library of Alexandria got burned because it probably had a lot of information in there. There's other individuals like James Churchward who spent about 5 decades out in the South Pacific trying to figure out if such a continent as Mu or Lemuria existed, and he concluded that there was, going back to about 50,000 years ago. So it's like the domino effect. You knock one domino down and it just keeps on going. The knowledge recedes from you. The more you get into it, you go, nothing at all is what I thought it was. So what I did prior to publishing the book was I started accumulating classic UFO cases, documented cases like the Great Airship Mystery, cases of UFO crashes in the 1800s, you know, where they had brass cogs throwing off sparks, and they found the remnants of it prior to the Great Industrial Railroad Revolution. And there seems to be a guiding hand in there, is that Leonard Stringfield's probably the best person to go to for the underlying reality of UFO crash retrievals. And the general consensus amongst ufologists, even conservative ones like Richard Dolan, is that there's some level of reality to that. The artifacts have been found, they've been confiscated, they've been retro-engineered, and it's part and parcel of the technology that has been put in. Some of it has been put into the public domain right now. Because you figure back in 1997, the best computer that we had was a chess playing program. And then you fast forward just 22 years, we've got D-wave quantum computers that, according to physicist David Deutsch, is accessing parallel worlds, parallel dimensions, and making calculations between parallel realities. I mean, that's a huge leap. And I know there's a lot of people in the world that are a lot smarter than me and everybody I know put together, but I'm not sure they're that smart. You know, I think we've had some help along the way, and that there's an agenda. There's a really famous contact case called the Amphisia, or the W56 Friendship Group, that happened back in 1956. That's why they call it the W56 Group. But this was a group of humanoids that explained themselves as the precursors to the spirit world, that were from various parts of the universe, that interacted with over 200 Italians back in 1956 to about 1967. And they've actually got video and still photographs of their craft that have been analyzed in multiple optical labs and determined to be authentic objects, you know, about 30 feet in diameter. And, you know, they're not hoaxes. It was way before CGI or any of the shenanigans that are going on right now. So there's some reality to that mass contact case. And one of the things that the Amphisia told the Italian contactees was that humans were involved with an artificial race that worships technology. They call them the contraries, or the CTRs. And that strangely correlates with all of Rudolf Steiner's material from the 1920s. He talked about beings from the eighth sphere that converted converted biology to mineral. In other words, machines, biology to machine. So there's this whole theme underlying all of the research that all of the UFO authors that I encountered underlying it all, that there's a technological push, there's a technological guidance. So it just dawned on me one day, like an epiphany, that they're talking about the coming singularity. You know, the concept of the singularity started out with I.G. Good back in 1965. He talked about an intelligence explosion, and then it was picked up by a science fiction writer, Werner Vinge, in 1992, and then in 2005, Ray Kurzweil wrote The Singularity is Near, and he talks about an exponential growth in technological advancement. For the last few decades, we've pretty much been under what they call Moore's Law, where technology doubles every year. And we're just on the curve of the leg right now, going into exponential expansion of technology. And we have not experienced that in the history of humanity, to our knowledge, unless it's a recreation of the Atlantean culture or what existed prior to the Younger Dryas impact event of 12,920 years ago. But there's definitely non-human entities that know that we're being helped technologically, and we've got people like the Amphisia group that are guiding humanity into a very positive future. They're living proof, actually, that a positive post-singularity world, unified world, can occur. And then there's the warning of the CTRs or the demons or the jinn or whatever you want to call it. Some speculate that they're from Orion, and they have an agenda of their own. And if you wonder what that agenda would be, I'd refer somebody to Alana Freeland, who just wrote a marvelous book called Under an Ionized Sky. And according to her, through the chemtrails and whatnot, we've all got the aluminum, the barium, the nanoparticulates And the goal, according to Freeland, is something she calls a space fence lockdown, where under a central artificial intelligence, humanity is controlled mind and soul down to the DNA level. So if you put all this together, what the physicists are saying about parallel worlds decohering from one another, it looks like there's two possible futures. One of them is Freeland's description, where there's a kind of a prison planet lockdown run by an alien force that does not have our best interest in mind, because it's what they do. They seize planets throughout the galaxy or throughout the universe. And Lynn Kasten talks about that a lot in his book, The Alien New World Order. So there's that. And then there's the Anesthesia, who apparently have some sort of non-interference policy like Star Trek. They call it the Prime Directive, where they just don't interfere with people who are less developed sociologically or technologically, but they contact certain individuals or certain groups and give them little pieces of information, those that are ready and seek them. So it may very well be that we're looking at a bifurcation of timelines, where one is kind of a utopia in what Michio Kaku calls the Type 1 civilization, where all the nation states and all the countries unify, and that's we're Type 0 right now, so we gravitate into a Type 1 civilization. And then there's the other dystopia, where there's an alien force that takes over the planet, and the people of low vibration that are still into ego and territoriality and acquisition and material wealth and everything, they go that direction. And it's kind of ironic, because if they're the people that wind up on the prison planet, they kind of got what they deserve. So my goal in life at this point is to let go of the things that are dragging me down into this dystopian view of reality, and seeking the higher beings and the higher behaviors, being the best version of myself that I can, so that if there is a decoherence, that I wind up, in a desirable place.
Amazing. And let me ask you this. The book itself, and within it, it depends on how you read it, but it establishes relationships in realistic and understandable pieces between ourselves, other types of entities, aliens, ghosts. Do you feel that there's a relationship that's all interrelated, and in what way? Okay.
First of all, as Keel identified the electromagnetic superspectrum, Keel and Ivan Sanderson hit it on the head, that we are not alone here on Earth. We actually, according to their research and beliefs, coexist with an aerial race that lives in the unseen realms of the electromagnetic superspectrum. And what we're calling flying saucers are always in our atmosphere. It's just that under certain geomagnetic conditions, in certain what he called window areas or flap areas that have been seen for centuries in the same area, by certain types of people that you might call psychic, or they have second sight, they look into the electromagnetic spectrum a little farther than other people. These objects are presented visually to these people, and there seems to be some function in the individuals that have UFO encounters to tell other human beings about this and guide humanity along a certain path. Now, the problem with the technological singularity is that elsewhere in the galaxy, technological singularities may happen, but they happen naturally when the population's sociological and psychological development matches the technology, and ours is way skewed. We're nowhere even ready for a technological singularity or a unified planet. They asked Keel one time if he thought there would ever be a world government, because yes, it's inevitable, but not for about 500 years. In other words, we're just not ready for it. Heck, we can't even get along with each other in the same country, much less, a unified planet. So for a technological singularity to come upon by manipulation, a population like humanity in the current state of affairs, it causes some issues. And I think that's why the friendship groups, the Amicizia, come intervene every once in a while. It's why UFOs show up at nuclear plants. Like Robert Salas in Faded Giant, he tells the whole story of his nuclear facility where the Minuteman missiles got shut down. And at the same time, it was happening in the Soviet Union. And in Salas's new book, Unidentified, he actually describes all the nuclear facilities around the world that have had such encounters where they've had malfunctions and shutdowns in the presence of a UFO. So somebody out there doesn't want us to blow ourselves up. It may be that we have terraformers that have put a lot of loving energy into this planet, making things nice, and they just don't want us to blow the whole thing to smithereens because our technology is out of control. And that's probably the reason when we dropped the first atom bomb in 1945, all the interdimensionals and extraterrestrials that got their attention, and flying saucers showed up in droves. It started the whole ufological mythos. So there's a lot going on, and to answer your question, I think it's all interconnected, and we're in the process of learning just how. I'm fortunate enough to have met Raniero Hernandez, who hooked up with Edgar Mitchell and formed the Free organization. And they came out with one book where they did surveys on experiencers and found out, for the most part, people are having very positive experiences with non-human intelligence, NHI. And they did it through survey. Now, you've got other researchers like David Jacobs, who says that that's not the conscious survey method isn't really going to get you the accurate information. He's into the hypnotic regression. And so there's kind of a debate going on of which method of information retrieval is best. The hypnotic regression, where people have missing time and you put them under trance and, they don't even remember what they say and they come out with this story. And I actually surprisingly had one of my own in 1979 that I'd forgotten about until I got a phone call 32 years later, and some of it came back to me. But in 1979, I was going to a sales convention with a friend of mine named Mary, and we were driving back about 1 o'clock in the morning from Indianapolis to Bloomington, and all of a sudden, in my memory, all these years, it was suddenly daylight, and I pulled up in her driveway, and I was really tired. I didn't feel very good, and I asked if I could sleep on her couch. And what she told me in this phone call in 2012 was that she had seen a tree-level orb, which you read about in the literature quite a bit, that grew and started chasing the car, and she was worried about it. And there's thousands of these types of testimonies out there where the orb is actually, chasing a vehicle. And she says, I told you to speed up. You remember me telling you to speed up? And I do remember that, putting the pedal to the metal and trying to go faster. But then all I remember is, it was daylight. So I may have actually had some type of encounter myself. She said while I was asleep on her couch, she had purchased a white dress for the sales convention, and it was muddy from head to toe. And as she's telling me this, I'm thinking, did I have too much to drink? Did we run into a ditch? Were we trying to pull the car out? All these mundane explanations, trying to come forth. But she tried to get a hold of Bud Hopkins for several years. Of course, we parted ways, so I didn't know about it. And he was having some health issues at the time and said she needed to get a hold of me, and she tried but couldn't. So through the magic of Facebook, 32 years later, I get a hold of her and have a long telephone conversation, and she tells me the story from 1979, which literally just stunned me. I was on the phone. She had my full attention. And the one thing that she told me was I was driving a green Toyota Tercel, and I do not remember ever owning a green Toyota Tercel, and I'm kind of a car guy. I get emotionally attached to my cars. And I thought, there's no way I ever owned that car. So I called somebody very close to me in Bloomington, Indiana, and he confirmed that I did, in fact, have a green Toyota Tercel, but I still don't remember it. And people ask me, why don't you do hypnotic regression? It's like I just feel like if the memory was wiped, there's a reason for it, and I just want to leave it alone. And there's a lot of little incidents like that after the near-death experience and after my delving into the UFO literature of the paranormal and cryptids and everything like that, several experiences throughout my life and even back into my childhood came to mind that I just sort of filed away in my brain because I didn't know where to put it. One was in 1961 when I was 6 years old in a trailer, and my mother tucked me in bed and left the room. And out of my peripheral vision, I remember laying there seeing two humanoid figures that were so black that they were like black holes, that they just, no light could even come out of it. And I know now they call them shadow people or whatever. And because I watched them walk over to the bed, and they looked at each other, they looked down at me, and then they stood back up and just vanished. So all this time, I've been thinking, oh, maybe it was a photoelectric effect, when my mom shut out the light, and all that. No, it was some sort of encounter with some type of non-human intelligence. And then a few years later, it was 1966, when I was 11 years old, I was living in Titusville, Florida, and I walked down the driveway to get the mail, and I looked up as an 11-year-old, and there, hovering in the sky, was 5 or 6 discs of a dark pewter color, and they were so stationary it looked like a painting. And my response as an 11-year-old was I dropped to my knees and started crying. And the reason I was crying was I was afraid they weren't going to take me with them. I wanted to go home. I remember thinking this when I was an 11-year-old kid. And that was another thing that all my life I've remembered this, but I didn't really know exactly the nature of the experience. Was it a dream? Was it a daydream? Or, why is this stuck in my head all these years? There's got to be a reason. So now that I'm at where I'm at with all this, I can look back on these childhood experiences and kind of put the pieces together that, I've had interactions with non-human intelligence all along. It's just that I didn't recognize it, and I didn't know how to classify it in my brain. And they were just there so that later on in life, when, I realized that UFOs were real and that there was an intelligence beyond this one and dimensions beyond the one that we're currently living in, that it would all somehow make sense to me. So, but back to how the book came together, I was naive enough to think that I could get a personal collection of all the classic UFO cases. I started documenting, the Great Airship Mystery, the Cash Landrum event, the Steve Michalak encounter up in Winnetobo, where he had the checkerboard radiation burns on his chest that kept reoccurring throughout all his life. And what I realized was it really receded from me, and I realized the extent of it, that there's actually thousands upon thousands of such documented incidences, and that I would never be able to do that. I discovered an online site called UFO Case Thought. So there is somebody trying to document all these different types of sightings and a little, paragraph of description of each one. So I just stopped right there, and I recategorized the book into decades. There's the top cases from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. There's one chapter on about 40 top UFO researchers and a paragraph on what they determined after several decades of research. And as I mentioned earlier, they all have some sort of conclusion in the end that the underlying nature of the UFO phenomena has to do with human spiritual evolution and human technology, that there's some sort of union between the two. And then there's other modern writers, there's an Israeli scholar named Yuval Noah Harari, and he wrote 2 books, The Sapiens and Homo Deus. And then that's when we get into the artificial intelligence aspect of this whole thing, because there's 56 companies right now working on what's called AGI. What we've got right now in our hands, I'm on a cell phone, that's narrow AI. That's our computers, cell phones, and whatever. But the 56 companies, including DARPA, which is really scary to me, is AGI, or human-level artificial intelligence. So there's a prediction made by Oxford University professor Dr. Nick Bostrom that from the time somebody invents AGI, human-level artificial intelligence, it'll be 2 hours to 18 months through evolutionary algorithms and machine learning that it converts itself into artificial superintelligence. And that's a whole different ballgame, because you're not just talking about an AI that's as smart as a human. You're talking about artificial superintelligence that's 10,000 times smarter than all humans combined. and could absorb the internet and could just decide to turn all of our atoms into computronium, for its own goals. And they're already finding out that AIs think very differently than humanity. There's a Chinese company that makes microloans, and it's totally in charge of, the AI is totally in charge of who gets a loan and who doesn't. And they're finding out that the AI that's in charge of who gets a loan has criteria like how much battery does the applicant have in his cell phone right now? Stuff that we wouldn't even think had anything to do with anything. And their dropout rate is like 2%. It's like really, really low. And as we speak, speaking of China, Kai-Fu Lee has a really good book out called AI Superpower. There's the New World Order. And China is actually creating digital infrastructure on just about every continent on Earth right now. While we're all, messed up with what we're dealing with right now, they're steadily selling autonomous drones to Iran. They're building special roads for autonomous vehicles, getting ready for the tens of thousands of autonomous vehicles, driverless vehicles that'll be on the road soon. They're building ghost towns for their future population that they don't even have anybody living there. They're just empty cities. So China's on the ball. They've got a Mars rover being launched in 2020 that's going to land on Mars. So China's doing a lot of really interesting things. And you hear a lot about 5G, and that actually enables a lot of the Internet of Things to come to life. So we're all headed into a very strange, unrecognizable territory in the next decade or two with all this technology, because your refrigerator, your thermostat in your home, your car, everything is going to be tied into an AI system, driverless cars. So then you wonder, what's going to happen with jobs? Well, Chase Callum wrote the Economic Singularity, I believe is the title of his book. It's like what's going to happen when artificial intelligence and robots and automation takes over human jobs. So there's people that have, they're what they call techno prophets that have a utopian view of the singularity. Ray Kurzweil's one of them. He's taken daily supplements so he can live long enough to undergo whole brain emulation where he uploads his consciousness into a computer. There's the Singularity University that people attend every year to get the new cutting edge AI information. And I ran into a woman named Suzanne Gilder who has a company called Sanctuary AI, and the mission statement of her company is to provide sanctuary for humanoid robots before releasing them into the general public. And there's a lot of speculation by people like Steve Omohundro about what an artificial superintelligence would actually do if we did that. Some people want to raise the first AGI in a virtual reality environment that it doesn't know it's not in the real world. And other researchers believe that even if we raised an AGI in a virtual reality environment, that it would figure it out and break free from it. And then there's speculations like from Steve Omohundro of what an artificial superintelligence, what its goals might actually be. And some of them are pretty interesting that I've run across in the literature, like turning yourself invisible, colonizing the universe, taking over planets, engaging in ecophagia, which is consuming other asteroids and planets for your own purposes. So we really don't know what kind of Pandora's box we're opening with artificial intelligence. So as these 56 companies move closer and closer to this artificial general intelligence or human level intelligence, the world's going to really radically change, and a lot of people aren't going to be ready for it. They're predicting resistance movements and maybe even terrorist factions that are trying to blow up the labs that are making these machines. So you remember the Luddites, right? Where they come up with the looms and they took hatchets to all the looms because they thought the looms were taking their jobs. Well, there's probably going to be a modern version of the Luddites that ain't having any of this, and they'll probably call themselves the freedom fighters and have this big fear campaign that AI is going to take over the world and we're all going to be robots and totally controlled. But I really do think that there's the existence of the Amicizia group gives me hope that positive unified worlds, post-singularity, unified planets where people are spiritually evolved and get along with one another do in fact exist. And these types of beings are available to those that seek them, through meditation, through synchronicities, through getting out and, associating yourself with people that are interested in the field. One thing leads to another, and pretty soon you meet a really interesting person, and everything just sort of unfolds like a kaleidoscope. So
let me ask you a question really quick. You're talking about basically a technological singularity. Do you think that that's in the future, or has that already happened?
Well, that's a really good question, because you have all these secret space program alleged whistleblowers and testimonies of the 20 and back program and all that. And when I first heard people like Corey Good and Randy Kramer, and there's others that some of which I've met personally and consider casual friends now, I'm open-minded to what they have to say. Randy Kramer just passed the lie detector test, so even though something may sound strange to me, people that used to talk about near-death experiences used to sound strange to me, and I would just write it off, as this is a fiction in their mind. It's ketamine, endorphins are flooding their brain, and it's how the brain copes with near-death. So now that I'm beyond that, and I do realize that we're living in a multidimensional existence, and that as we speak, there's a higher version of ourselves in another dimension, what we would call the distant future, that's in superposition with my current physical life. I'm conscious of that person, and I try to live my life according to the goals of my higher self. But
I think if you questioned 100 people randomly today and asked them when was the last time they were in a public restroom, or not a public restroom, but in their restroom at home where they didn't take their phone with them,
right?
That has changed us dramatically, and that's one thing
sure.
Is always going to be a significant turning point in us as humans, right?
Oh yeah, you go into a bar. It used to be, guys were trying to meet ladies and people were talking to each other or playing cards at a table. Now you go into a pub or something, and every single person on down the line staring at their phone, and they're texting the person that's sitting right next to them. And young people, I heard on one of your other programs somebody talking about how his childhood was devoid of all this technology. I feel very grateful that I had a childhood that was devoid of a cell phone, because I have to admit I've been assimilated too. I spend a lot of time online, a lot of time on Facebook. My phone, I've got like 300 audiobooks in my phone, and I listen to these books at night with headphones, with wireless headphones. So
I love that.
My dreams are choreographed according to the information that's coming through my ears. I mean, it's great. But yeah, I mean, I'm assimilated into machine intelligence too. But I'm glad it happened later in life, because I love my childhood down in Titusville, Florida. I grew up on the Space Coast, and we watched all the moon rockets go off. There's like 1 million people down there by the Indian River. We could see the vertical assembly building and the Saturn V sitting there on the launch pad. And when it went off, I mean, their jaws were dropped, and mine was too. But there'd be 1 million people down by the river standing on the roofs of their car. You could feel the ground shake and windows break, and people selling hot dogs. I mean, it was really something.
Did you ever see one go up and then bounce off a glass dome?
No,
I haven't either. That was last week's show, but it's incredible too. When I attended university back in the 80s, we would be on the campus on the oval and sitting around and playing Frisbee and mountain bikes, hacky sack, whatever. And that was the first thing that really hit me about 10 years ago, taking my son, to the university and seeing people just, maybe 3 or 4 people out there, and they were all on their phones, and people were walking and no bicycles. And it just changed dramatically. And to me, that was a significant event in my life.
Yeah, we didn't have air conditioning. We had these little jealousy windows, and a good time for me was when the smoke started coming through the window from the Mosquito truck. And our parents didn't know it, but bicycles would just be pouring down the driveway, because there'd be a whole group of us kids huffing following
the Mosquito truck. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's what's wrong with me,
And nobody, I've brought that up many times. We hear that truck coming in the summer and that hum, and we would be in that ghostly white fog as it went through the alleyways, and I can still smell it.
Yeah. Yeah, we had the console TV that you sat in your chair and you looked down close to the floor, and you only had like 3 channels. And when you got the snow, you went outside to turn the antenna. You know, my dad would go outside and huff it. You know, he'd be straining, trying to move the antenna, you know, where it would pick up a station. And wall phones. I mean, it was just a whole different world than what it is right now.
We turned the TV antenna until we discovered aluminum foil on the cable.
Rabbit ears.
Yeah, and it had 5 or 6 different pieces of aluminum foil, and we would literally, you know, after a few weeks, change the aluminum foil, believing, you know, nobody knew how that worked or why it worked that way, but it did make a difference.
Yeah. Have you heard about the incident in 1977 that came through in the United Kingdom where this 5 different television stations got hijacked, and this being that identified himself as Beryllion came on and gave some message to the public? They still haven't figured out how anybody could have done that. You know, that's not within the capabilities of amateur people to hijack 5 television stations. Nobody's come forth. And that's another curiosity to me. You've got pictures like Valiant Thor at the Pentagon. You know, you've got pictures in Howard Menger's backyard of Valiant Thor and his crew. You've got pictures of the Anesthesia group. There's one in particular named Kineo online, and all the optical physicists have looked at that photo of Kineo and determined that he was about 12 foot tall and that he doesn't have a human relationship of head dimension to body dimension. Leonardo da Vinci pointed out that head to body is 1 to 7. This guy's 1 to 9. So his head's smaller than what it should be for the body that he's in. So they're figuring that he's a 12-foot tall individual. So it's really interesting to look at these photographs, and the way I look at it is nobody ever came forth and said, oh, I know who that is, or that was me, or, you know, they're mystery photographs. They're real photographs that were taken back in the 50s, and they just stare you in the face. It's like, what in the world's going on with that?
You know,
and then we were talking.
Anthropology, let me ask you this really quick. Anthropology has been my thing for forever, but and when we talk about artificial intelligence, do you think that will artificial intelligence be a significant aspect of the future, even if humans are able to adapt and become super intelligent themselves? Will one supersede the other, or?
Well, that's a complicated question because I think that we've experienced an intervention. There's a couple of, you talk about anthropology, I think there's a couple of intervention points in the past. One was between Australopithecus, which was a 4-foot tall monkey-like creature with a brain the size of an orange. And then about 2 million years ago, all of a sudden, it's much taller, the brain's 3 times the size. You got Homo erectus. And the interesting thing about Homo erectus was they only had one piece of technology for almost 2 million years. It was just a stone chip bifaced axe. And there's theories on how they used it, whether they just used it to scrape trees and make clothes, or if they were carnivorous and threw it into a herd of animals, or how they used that. But what that tells me, since they never had any motivation to improve that technology, is that they lived in cooperative groups. They didn't have the territoriality or the one-upsmanship or whatever it is that got invested in Homo sapiens to make us go to war with each other and spill our guts on the battlefield. I think that's specifically to expedite technology, because as soon as Homo erectus was displaced by Homo sapiens, at some point, as you probably know if you're into anthropology, the telomeres on chromosome number 2 were fused, and the overlapping code between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens was expertly deleted. It would take about 8 million years of natural evolution to do that. So there's biological professors like Dr. Arthur David Horn who realized that we'd had a couple of ET interventions, one between Australopithecus and Homo erectus, and then another one between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens. And he quit his job after 14 years at Colorado University and wrote his book, Humanity's Extraterrestrial Origins. And that's one of the first books that I encountered. And it's a really good book about his speculations about different intervention times. So this whole, this new species of Homo sapiens, for some reason, if you read Titus Livy or any of the ancient historians, we have had a bloody, terrible, violent, horrible past. And it seems like it's always been that way since Homo sapiens came upon this earth. It's just one battle after another. I was reading Titus Livy, and one of the Romans accused the Roman soldiers of being lazy. So they just went into the next neighborhood and killed everybody, and just to prove that they weren't lazy. There was one battle that he talked about where there was 800 people after the battle was done that had dug a little hole and stuck their head in it to suffocate themselves rather than die by the sword. But our history is so horrible that you wonder, it's like, what on earth is here that would motivate a creature like us to go into these medieval battles where there's like thousands of people on both sides, and they just run, with axes and metal and everything. It just doesn't look like a good time to me. You see these shows like Vikings and Game of Thrones and all that. You see these old battles reenacted, and it's like, my God, that is horror. And Homo erectus wasn't like that. So there was a big change in psychology. Now, you got this other fellow, Dr. Ellis Silver, that wrote a book called Humans Are Not From Earth, that thinks we were brought here at some point in time. And he points out things like, we got backaches, our skin gets sunburned, just all different kinds of things. That's why he doesn't think humans are even from here. So it may be that, ETs could have taken a sample of Homo erectus somewhere else and tweaked him a little bit and brought him back as Homo sapiens to displace Homo erectus. But the whole natural evolution from Australopithecus to Homo erectus to Homo sapiens doesn't make any sense. Now, you've all Noah Harari, in his book Homo Deus, says we're in a speciation event as we speak. And as soon as this artificial general intelligence is invented and it exists here on Earth, human beings, Homo sapiens, become obsolete. So I read all of Dr. Jacobs' material about the hybridization program and the fact that the hybrids are among us now. And it is amazing. Some of these young people do seem to have abilities that are beyond the norm. So it may be, there's an abductor named Jim Maroney that wrote the UFO Answer book. He talks of his 1986 abduction, car and all, onto the a spacecraft and interacted with strange-looking aliens. And he says they told him that we were having an intervention. So it may very well be that this is how evolution works, that every once in a while a non-human intelligence intervenes in the species and tweaks us a little bit, in preparation for the future world. And it appears, the indications are that we're in the middle of a speciation event. So if you tie all this together, the hybridization program, the fact that there are people right now walking among us that are way smarter than everybody else, that are involved in AI research and everything, the singularities upon us, it may very well be, this is something I've thought about, that we're going to need augmented intelligence to even understand who our visitors are. I love what Terence McKenna said, that our visitors are disguising themselves as spaceships from another planet so as not to freak us out. And it may be that the phantom armies of the past, the fiery chariots of the past, the headless horsemen of the past, the fairies, are the modern day flying saucers and ufonauts, just seen from a different paradigm. Now that we're into space travel and technology, that's how we're interpreting the phenomena. But it may not be the final paradigm. There may be some other perception that we gain once we augment our intelligence with electronically and expand our intelligence level, expand our perceptions. And I ran into an interesting Russian fellow named Alex Vikolov, and he just wrote a book called The Scintillect Hypothesis, and he talks a lot about this, where we're going to merge with technology, and that the only thing out there in the universe flying around are scintillects, people that are about 1 billion times smarter than us, who have merged their biology with technology, and they've figured out how to go through wormholes, and they've mastered time and space. And the subject of time and how it operates is a whole different thing. Carlo Rovelli's got 2 books out, The Order of Time and Reality is Not What It Seems. And the biggest thing I could take away from that is that what we call our present moment, which our scientists believe is the only thing that's objectively real. The past is gone, the future has yet to happen. So they're really focused on presentism, this present moment that we experience with just the fleeting few nanoseconds of reality. That's the only thing that's real. And what all the physicists are saying is that that's not reality at all. That our present moment isn't even shared throughout the rest of the universe. That they may be on a completely different time cycle. And one thing I didn't know was that time flows slower on the surface of the Earth than it does in the mountains or it does in space. And if you throw a ball up in the air, the reason that it comes back down to the Earth is something we call gravity, but it's actually trying to gravitate to where time flows slower. And it's trying to get to the core of the Earth, which is about 4,000 miles down. The radius of the Earth is about 8,000 miles to my recollection. So somebody 3,000 miles down there would experience a time flow much slower than surface dwellers, which brings up a whole other implications. If there is such a thing as a hollow Earth or a honeycomb Earth, and there's people down there, they're on a different time cycle than us surface dwellers. They could stay down there, and hundreds of years would pass on the surface, and they wouldn't experience that time lag.
Interesting. So do you think that humans will be smart enough to survive despite overpopulation and our inability to get along? Will technology help us survive, or will there be a mutualistic relationship between us and technology, and we'll still be here in 1,000 years?
Yeah, we'll still be here in 1,000 years. And the reason I say that is because of the example of the Amphisia and their example of a post-singularity unified society. They don't use money, just like Star Trek. They don't look at material objects as something to acquire and to have more than your neighbor. I mean, it's a whole different mindset. Material possessions, the concept of possessions doesn't even exist. Materiality is just a utilitarian function. You've got replicators that can transform the molecular structure of inert substances into foodstuffs, so we don't have to kill animals anymore. I mean, it's a whole different mindset. And I think the people that are currently working on trying to hone themselves into this mindset are the ones that will experience that particular timeline. And the ones that continue to live their lives in fear and territorial acquisition and war and conflict and domination and that sort of thing will probably get on a different timeline and experience the space fence lockdown, as Alana Freeland calls it. And there's another interesting researcher named Anthony Patch. He's a fundamentalist Christian online, and I don't share a lot of his political religious views, but I really like his research. And one of the things in one of his programs on YouTube, he was saying that in conjunction with the space fence lockdown scenario, they're trying to create something called a Birkeland current from the Earth to Saturn inside the hexagon on the North Pole of Saturn, and download the beings that live inside Saturn something similar to a 3D printer. And that kind of coordinates with the fears that another author, Thomas Horn, who's also in the Christian community, who fears that CERN is trying to open up a portal to let demons through into our realm. So I just try to keep an open mind. I mean, Thomas Horn is a really smart guy, and he's written a lot of cool books. Exo Vaticana, I think, is one name of his books, and Stargate Conspiracies. So there's a lot going on in the realms of thought concerning the UFO phenomenon, different speculations and theories about it. But I think both of these realities are ahead of us, and it just depends on I think we're here to make a choice in which one we want to align ourselves with, and that's the experience that we'll have 1,000 years from now. Then you bring in Dr. Bruce Goldberg. He talks a lot about time travel. He's got several books out about time travel, and he thinks that some of the beings that we worship as gods, like Osiris from Egypt, were actually time travelers. So he's got a whole body of information and lots of good videos online about it. He goes various parts of the world talking about the time traveling aspect of the UFO phenomenon.
I would assume, in addition to a technological singularity, if we've already had one, we'll more than likely have another one in the future. But we would also have some sort of environmental singularity, meaning that there's going to come a time when it's possible that we may not need to pollute the earth, if that makes any sense. I mean, we're not doing that on purpose, but it's just sort of a byproduct of our technology and our lifestyle. So would you see that changing?
Yeah, well, Dr. Nick Bostrom talks about one of the things an artificial superintelligence would do is become a planetary sovereign, and that would mean an entire planet that was run according to its programming to maintain homeostasis on an entire planet for all the flora and fauna on that world, and that could go either way. It could be a really good thing or a really bad thing, depending on the seed AI and depending on the cognitive parameters that were invested in the initial AGI. That's crucial in how this scenario is going to play out. James Barrett wrote Our Final Invention, The End of the Human Era, and he spells out all of the concerns about AI and all of the possible benefits. But yeah, I mean, I can see a real positive scenario where all the complications of running a planet and controlling the population and take care of the animals and the plants and all that is pretty much beyond human cognition, or especially one person to do that. So if there's ever a unified planet, it's not going to be under the hands of humans. It'll be under the hands of a sentient artificial intelligence that runs everything very efficiently. You remember the old film, The Day the Earth Stood Still, how they turned everything over to Gort? There's a lot of fear generated when you start talking like that, because a lot of people don't like that idea that a planet would be run by a sentient, autonomous artificial intelligence, because what if it decided that you weren't in the best interest of all flora and fauna on the planet and just took you out, and that may be necessary at some point. And there's people like Eliezer Yudkowsky. He sort of lives like a monk, and he's really focused on this initial cognitive architecture that's going into the first AGI. And he came up with something called coherent extrapolated volition, where if you've got a sentient AI, especially that interacts with humans or maybe like runs the planet, you don't want them to operate on the morality structure that we have, because just 2,000 years ago, we were entertained with eating bread while people killed themselves to death in the arena, with swords and laughing and clapping about the whole thing and having a grand old time. Now, that is offensive to our morality 2,000 years later, but what are we doing right now that 1,000 or 2,000 years from now, we'll look back and go, oh my God, is eating animals something that will be considered brutal and terrible, that we do right now that, they won't do like 100 years from now even, because as soon as replicators are available where you can just take inert material and rearrange the molecular structure and produce food, then, that'll eliminate the need to have other creatures have to die in the slaughterhouses, just to keep our bodies alive. So I'm looking forward to that aspect of it. There's a couple of companies right now that are making artificial meat. There's a company in Texas, I believe, doing it where they grow the meat in a lab. And that creeps a lot of people out, to see muscle meats grown in a petri dish, and they say they don't want nothing to do with it. So, yeah, we've got a whole lot of changes coming. Some of it is on the tip of our cognition that we're able to conceive of right now. But the big thing about a technological singularity is that there's an event horizon that we're approaching, just like approaching the precipice of a black hole, beyond which our cognition can't go. We're not even able to conceive of what's going to happen at that time. And that's why science fiction authors like Werner Vinke don't even make speculations about the singularity, because it's not something that's really knowable at this present in time. All we know is we're heading there, and we're heading there pretty quick. And it's going to go faster and faster as each year goes by from now until the singularity actually happens.
So after reading 300 books on ufology and related, other than your own book, what was your favorite?
Oh, I love Anatomy of the Phenomena. Keel's, all of Keel's books, The Eighth Tower. The Eighth Tower was kind of a cult hit in the United Kingdom, but Americans threw stones at it because he deviates from the standard extraterrestrial hypothesis. He coined the term ultra-terrestrial, I believe, and he's one of these subscribers that thinks there's an unseen population of non-human intelligence that coexists right here, indigenous to planet Earth, that has access to the human collective unconsciousness and can produce what appear to be physical objects or flying saucers or whatever our perception of it is at the time. guiding us along the path to who knows where. So Disneyland of the Gods is good. Any of the collections of Keel's old writings on audible.com is good. Dr. Jacques Vallée, I find, is extraordinary, because if you just want to go into paleo sightings and all these sightings that happened like in the 1800s and 1700s and all that, read Dimensions or Revelations. And I do like Linda Moulton Howe's work on cattle mutilations called An Alien Harvest. And when I first got into this, I watched her video online about the alien harvest, and I was okay along the whole lines of what she was saying until I saw the human tissue harvesting, and the blood from my face literally dropped to my feet, and I went, "Oh, this is not a human being doing this. This may not even be, anything other than an AI or artificial intelligence, doing some function that it was programmed to do, with no feelings for humanity whatsoever." So, there's a lot of mysteries to sort out with it.
Will technology allow us to look the same 1 million years in the future?
Well, I think there'll be a great change 1,000 years from now. I think we'll probably look a lot different than we do now. And there's been some studies done on this by anthropologists projecting ahead on what the trends are. And if we're going into, spending all day looking at a screen, we really don't need muscles. And, we'd get slimmer. And one of the abductees, that's a pretty famous case, Betty Andreasen, she said something pretty spectacular about the beings that she encountered. They said that human beings are the larval form of the Greys. And that kind of stuck in my head, the larval form of the Greys. So Nigel Kerner, he looked into the actual nature of the Greys, and along with Leonard Stringfield, thought that they were cybernetic organisms, at least some of them are. And if they are a merging of biology and technology, we may very well be looking at ourselves from the future. So, all that kind of stuff's open to speculation. You just have to take the little bits and pieces of information that you've come across in your research and hold that as a possibility, and realize that nobody really knows for sure.
I think we have a lot of choices to make right now.
Yeah, and the biggest one, and I struggle with it myself, I'm no saint, is getting along with your fellow human beings, and not judging other people, not labeling somebody as bad, not engaging in the struggle. There's another giant channeled work called the Urantia book that I'm really fond of. It's about 2,097 pages, and it says, "Do not strive with your fellow man." And there's a lot of things that the Urantia book says regarding human spirituality that I really resonate with, regardless of the source, regardless of the reality of the cosmology that book actually portrays, which is pretty fantastic. There's a lot of good material in that.
Don't you think, though, that our inability to get along also shaped us as a society and got us to where we are right now?
Well, yeah, but there's a question. There's a question of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and it goes back to what we were talking about before. Because if the only purpose of the conflict and the war was to expedite technology, what would we have been naturally had we been left alone in our Homo erectus morphology with that one piece of technology? Was Homo erectus a highly evolved, highly spiritual creature that maybe even have been telepathic? I mean, we don't know. And it may have been a devolution going from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens, because Homo sapiens are pretty bloody and violent. And you look at the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, the Crusades, all the wars that we've had. I mean, it's just been one bloody massacre after another. Even Alan Taylor's got a really good book about American colonization that just totally horrified me. I mean, everything about early colonization just horrified me, because, prior to the Europeans coming over to this country, the Native Americans would use like every part of the deer. And then when they realized they could trade the carcasses for firearms, or the skins for firearms, there was all these dead deer carcasses just laying around the woods stinking. And the Europeans brought disease over here, and the diseases and weeds were exchanged, and we just displaced that whole population. And then Hernando Cortez coming up through Mexico, they thought that he was the reincarnation of Quetzalcoatl, and they greeted them as gods. Well, little do they know, Hernando Cortez was under 10% commission from the Spanish crown, and his only interest was murdering everybody and taking their gold. So this whole monetary system that we're under, where there's competition and the desire to amass a fortune, has really been murderous in a lot of ways. So if we had just been left alone without an ET intervention as Homo erectus, given millions and millions of years of natural evolution, maybe we would have achieved a technological singularity when we were sociologically and psychologically ready for it. But I really think the singularity at hand is being thrust upon humanity when we're not ready at all. But fortunately, not to be a doomsayer, there are positive interdimensionals and extraterrestrials who are here to guide us, who have an interest in us, who have already warned us about the CTRs, the artificial race that worships technology. And the Rudolf Steiner talked about it. I mean, there's a lot of really deep authors that have talked about this outside. Of course, even Carlos Castaneda talked about that humankind has a parasite, that they're dealing with. So I'm hopeful that the what William Bromley called the maverick race that has an interest in humanity can intervene with those who are interested and guide the more positive-oriented individuals among us into a positive timeline in a globally unified post-singularity planet where everything's pretty cool.
It was interesting to me. I was observing, and this was probably 2005, gentleman came to town, and it was a small town, fairly affluent town that I lived in. And he opened up a watch shop, and it was a high-end watch shop. And really you could buy a wristwatch that would be $10,000. And it was one of those things that it was almost like a train wreck, or you just couldn't take your eyes off it. You had to look at this guy and watch this guy go to work every day. He would walk past my office, and I'd never see anybody walk in that building. I'd never see anybody go in there and buy a watch. And, just right around the corner a couple of years later, a lot of people weren't buying watches because they were using cell phones, and the cell phones told time. And to think about that one device and how many other devices that replaced is astounding. You don't need a compass. There are practical uses for compasses and things like that, but it replaced so many items. And I could see in the future that there's going to be other changes like that. And not only that, maybe we might lack the need for other devices. Do you think that our lives will be much, much simpler in the future, or are they going to be continually becoming more complex and our needs more sophisticated?
Both. The people that go into the positive timeline in the post-singularity unified planet, what Michio Kaku calls the Type 1 civilization, will demonstrate both. Their life will be very simple in some ways, but technically and mentally, they'll be extremely more complicated than us. And they'll have augmented intelligence that enables them to have abilities and things they can think about and things they can do with themselves that we can't even imagine right now. So I think Yuval Harari is correct in his work Homo Deus, that we're looking at a speciation event, and as soon as this artificial superintelligence and everything comes online, Homo sapiens is obsolete.
Do you have another mega book inside you?
I've been thinking about it lately because since the book came out in 2016, I've been invited to a couple of conventions. I did a public speaking engagement at the Stargate to the Cosmos event in New Mexico. And I remember what Keel said, about not letting it become an obsession to you or getting involved in the whole circuit. I don't want to become a Trekkie, where I just go from convention to convention. Right. But I was invited to the Human Origins Conference in April in New Mexico. So I accepted a speaking engagement there. And I've got two presentations. One is Overlords of Singularity, where I talk about my whole journey and the contents of the book. And the other one is strangely UFOs and Religion, because there's been a lot of UFO cults that have arisen that people don't know about that have had a tremendous impact on our entire culture. In fact, D.W. Pasulka, who's the professor of religious studies with a specialty in Catholic culture, she just wrote American Cosmic. And I just got through with that one, an audio version, and it's really good because she got more than she bargained for. She thought she would walk into ufology just looking at the cultural impact of the myth of the flying saucer and everything. And I don't want to do a spoiler, but she comes away with some solidity in the phenomena that she didn't expect she would acquire. And one of the things she talked about is going to the Vatican with this friend of hers, and they've got like 152 miles of books under armed guard there in underground facilities that talk about the bilocation of saints, levitating saints. They've got incorruptible bodies under glass that haven't decomposed since they died. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff in the Vatican that I really think should be made public. Somebody should make copies of all the scrolls and manuscripts, because what if it's destroyed? I mean, there's got to be a cache of really good information there going back to the first century. And I think the public deserves to know the contents of all that. So they're kind of keeping it under wraps and keeping it, to themselves. And I don't think that's right.
What are you reading next?
I don't know. That's a good question. I was recommended. I call her a library angel, where a library angel is somebody that will come along and lead you to your next book that you need to put some pieces together. And D.W. Pasulka's book, American Cosmic, did that for me. And also the Cosmos. I watched the Cosmos series by Dr. Carl Sagan when I was a kid on television, but it really doesn't do the book justice. And he went into a lot more detail about what he thought about extraterrestrial life in Cosmos than he said on television. And one of the things that really struck me was that he said that advanced civilization that know how to master time and space, like you would have to do to go to another galaxy, would easily be able to be here without our detection. And they could interact with us in ways that we might not expect. And, when I'm reading this, like the hair on the back of my neck stands up, because that's exactly what's happening. There's a huge population that's growing on Earth. Keel called them silent contactees. These are people that have had actual encounters with interdimensional beings, extraterrestrial craft, UFO knots, and whatnot, and you'll never hear about them. It's a silent world. They have no desire to get on the radio or go to conventions or anything. It's such a profound, life-changing experience for them that they're just they're a silent population. But the thing is, they're starting to talk to one another, and there's this invisible college going on. I think Vali coined that phrase, the invisible college. I think he's even got a book called that, and that's very accurate about what's going on. So people talk about disclosure. Disclosure happens every day. And it happens on an individual basis or on a small group basis. And this population that lives on Earth here, the silent contactees population, is growing each and every day as we speak.
Overlords of the Singularity, the manipulation of humankind by hidden UFO intelligences and the quest for transcendence. That's the book by Russell Brinegar, and he's been my guest tonight. Russell Brinegar, please leave us with one final thought.
Pay attention to the close relationships in your life and make them as best as you can. If you love somebody, tell them every day. And try to repair something you've done to damage the relationships in your life with the people you care about.
Russell Brinegar, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by ELEON. You can find all ELEON's work online at Heart Dance Records.